In a city dominated by greed and appearances, a powerful man decides to hide his true identity to find out who really deserves to be by his side. He is Ethan Park, a relentless CEO who, tired of being surrounded by fake people, wears torn and dirty clothes and starts living like a beggar on the streets. In this disguise, he meets Isabella, a humble young woman who works hard to support her sick mother. Unaware that this simple man is, in fact, one of the richest businessmen in the city, Isabella completely changes Ethan's destiny. Ethan Park was known across the city as one of the most powerful men in the business world. At the age of 32, he had built a vast real estate empire that dominated the skyline with towers carrying his name. His appearance was always immaculate. Tall, with sharp shoulders, dark, neatly styled hair, and deep brown eyes that reflected both authority and calculation. Colleagues feared his cold and precise decisions, while rivals admired his ability to turn every negotiation into a victory. Despite the wealth and influence surrounding him, Ethan felt increasingly trapped in a world of false smiles and shallow relationships. He could not distinguish who valued him for his character and who stayed close only for his fortune. For years, Ethan had observed the behavior of people around him. Employees bowed in fear, investors praised him even when they disagreed, and socialites competed for his attention in glamorous events. Yet whenever he looked deeper, he noticed the absence of sincerity. This feeling, repeated daily, grew into frustration. He wanted to know how the world would treat him without the mask of wealth and power. It was this thought that led him to an unusual decision. Ethan would disguise himself as a beggar to discover who, among strangers, could see him as a man and not as a title. With the help of his loyal advisor, Mr. Hahn, a man of 58 years with silver hair and a discreet posture, Ethan prepared for the transformation. Mr. Hahn had served Ethan's family for decades and was one of the few who knew him intimately. He tried to discourage the idea, warning of the dangers of being recognized or humiliated. But Ethan insisted. "If I want to find honesty, I must step out of this world of privilege," he said. Mr. Hahn sighed, realizing that nothing could change Ethan's mind. The following evening, Ethan appeared very different from the image of a feared CEO. He wore torn clothes with stains of time, his hair disheveled, and his face intentionally darkened with dust to erase the features of elegance. Even in disguise, his height and posture stood out, but he lowered his shoulders and walked slowly, as if burdened by years of hardship. Leaving his luxury car behind, he walked into the narrow streets near the central market, where daily life was harsh and people rarely paid attention to strangers. At the corner of a small alley, Ethan sat on the cold pavement, holding a paper cup in his hands. Passers-by ignored him, some with indifference, others with disdain. For the first time, he felt the weight of invisibility. Hours passed, and his mind wandered between reflections on human behavior and the uneasiness of exposing himself to rejection. He realized how easy it was for society to turn its eyes away from those who seemed unimportant. As night fell, his stomach began to protest. He had left his mansion without eating, determined to experience a different reality. That was when Isabella Lee appeared in his field of vision. She was 26 years old, with long brown hair tied back in a simple braid, eyes full of expression, and a modest dress slightly worn from use. Isabella worked in a small coffee shop near the market, and after her shift she often carried leftover bread to distribute to those in need. Her life was far from easy. She lived with her mother, Grace Lee, a woman in her 50s who suffered from a chronic illness. To pay for medicine and rent, Isabella worked long hours, but she never lost her gentle nature. When she noticed Ethan sitting alone, Isabella approached with cautious steps. Unlike others, she did not avoid his gaze. "Are you hungry?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with genuine concern. Ethan looked up, surprised that someone had spoken to him without contempt. She offered him a piece of bread and a small cup of warm coffee. "It's not much, but it might help," she said with a sincere smile. Ethan accepted, touched by the simplicity of the gesture. The bread was ordinary, yet in that moment it tasted like something rare. Her kindness was the first spark of authenticity he had witnessed in a long time. Isabella did not ask about his past or why he was there. She simply sat beside him for a few minutes, speaking about the difficulties of the day and the hope she placed in tomorrow. Ethan listened attentively, fascinated by the way she shared her thoughts without expecting anything in return. He noticed her hands, marked by long hours of work, and her tired eyes that still carried brightness. For him, used to calculated interactions, her sincerity was almost disarming. Meanwhile, Clara Kim, a woman of 27 years with blonde hair always perfectly arranged and clothing of expensive brands, passed by with her friends. She looked at Ethan with disdain. "Disgusting," she whispered loudly enough for Isabella to hear. Clara had known Ethan as the CEO, though not closely, and she constantly sought to attract his attention during social events. Seeing him in the disguise of a beggar, she showed nothing but arrogance. Isabella, however, defended him without hesitation. "Every person deserves respect," she said firmly. Clara rolled her eyes and walked away, leaving behind only her perfume and disdainful laughter. The contrast between the two women did not go unnoticed by Ethan. On one side, arrogance and interest; on the other, compassion and truth. Sitting there, still holding the cup of coffee, Ethan understood that his decision to hide his identity would lead him to discoveries deeper than he had imagined. Isabella had no idea she was speaking with one of the most influential men in the city, and Ethan decided to keep his secret. For now, he would continue living as a beggar, seeking to learn who truly saw him as a human being. That night, when Isabella said goodbye and disappeared down the street with her modest bag of bread, Ethan felt something unusual: hope. For years, he had doubted the existence of sincere people around him. Now, for the first time, he had found someone who could change the course of his life. The following morning, Ethan Park once again left his luxurious penthouse behind. His security team and staff had no idea where he disappeared to at night, and only Mr. Hahn, his trusted advisor, understood the truth. Ethan dressed again in the same torn clothes with dust on his face, preparing to continue the role he had chosen. He knew he had to maintain the disguise convincingly if he wanted to discover how strangers would treat him when stripped of wealth and power. Sitting once more on the corner near the central market, Ethan observed the rhythm of the city. Vendors shouted offers, children ran between stalls, and busy workers hurried past without noticing the figure sitting on the pavement. People's eyes slid past him as though he were invisible, a reminder of how society often overlooked those without status. Hours passed before Isabella Lee appeared again, carrying her modest cloth bag after finishing her morning shift at the coffee shop. Just as in their first meeting, she noticed him immediately. Her long brown hair, tied back in a braid, framed her expressive eyes that reflected both kindness and fatigue. She approached with the same sincerity as the day before. "You are still here," she said softly, crouching down beside him. Her voice carried no judgment, only concern. Ethan looked at her carefully. To her, he was just another man struggling to survive, yet she treated him with dignity. "I brought something," she continued, opening her bag. She handed him a small sandwich wrapped in paper and a bottle of water. "It's simple, but at least it's fresh." Ethan accepted gratefully, touched by her generosity. "Thank you," he replied quietly, his deep voice carrying a weight he tried to mask. Isabella smiled, though her face showed signs of exhaustion from working long hours. As they shared a few words, Isabella spoke about her life. She explained that she lived with her mother, Grace Lee, who battled chronic illness. Grace was in her mid-50s, with frail health and limited mobility, relying on Isabella's dedication to cover the cost of medicine and their small rented apartment. Despite the heavy responsibility, Isabella never allowed bitterness to define her. Listening to her, Ethan felt an unfamiliar pull of respect. Her hands bore calluses from constant work, yet she gave away what little she had. Unlike the business circles he knew, where favors were exchanged for gain, Isabella offered without expecting anything in return. While they sat talking, Clara Kim passed by once again. Dressed in designer clothing, her blonde hair styled flawlessly, she noticed Isabella giving food to Ethan. Clara narrowed her eyes, her voice filled with scorn. "Why waste your time on people like him? They never change." Isabella looked up firmly. "Kindness doesn't cost anything," she replied. Clara shook her head dismissively and walked away, followed by her group of equally wealthy friends. Ethan kept silent, but inside he compared the shallow arrogance of Clara with the unpretentious compassion of Isabella. The contrast grew sharper each time. After Clara disappeared, Isabella sighed. "Some people forget that circumstances can change for anyone," she said. Ethan observed the conviction in her words, realizing she had wisdom far beyond her years. For the next hour, Isabella remained beside him, sharing small stories about the coffee shop, about customers she encountered, and about the struggles of balancing bills and medicine for her mother. Her life was far from easy, yet she spoke without self-pity, carrying instead a quiet resilience. When she finally stood to leave, she gave Ethan one last look. "Take care of yourself. I'll see you again," she said before disappearing into the crowd. Ethan remained seated, holding the sandwich she had given him, reflecting on the rarity of such genuine warmth. In his world, people competed for his attention because of his title. Here, without revealing who he was, someone treated him as a human being. Later that evening, Ethan returned to his mansion, where Mr. Han waited. "You look tired," the older man remarked, observing Ethan's disguise. "Not tired," Ethan answered. "Awakened." He explained how Isabella had returned, offering food and kindness without hesitation. Mr. Han listened quietly, recognizing a shift in Ethan's tone. "Be careful," Mr. Han advised. "The deeper you go into this disguise, the more complicated it will become when the truth emerges." Ethan nodded but said nothing more. In his heart, he knew that the journey he had begun was no longer just about testing the honesty of strangers. It was becoming something far more personal. Isabella's presence stirred emotions he had not felt in years: admiration, gratitude, and an unfamiliar hope. As the night settled over the city, Ethan sat by the window of his penthouse, looking down at the streets where he had just been invisible. Somewhere below, Isabella was likely caring for her mother, preparing for another exhausting day of work. For the first time in a long while, Ethan did not feel alone. He had found a connection beyond wealth, beyond power, beyond appearances. And though he knew the danger of revealing his true identity too soon, Ethan promised himself one thing: he would continue this journey, not only to discover the truth about those around him, but also to protect and understand the woman who had shown him kindness without knowing who he really was. The sun rose over the busy streets once more, casting golden light on the tall buildings of the city. Ethan Park, hidden behind his disguise of ragged clothes and unshaven appearance, prepared to spend another day living among those who never knew his real identity. Though he owned vast properties, influential companies, and unimaginable wealth, it was here, on the pavement of the market street, where he felt closer to truth than ever before. Ethan's disguise was convincing. His once sharp and polished features were dulled with dust and ash, his black hair tangled and his piercing eyes concealed behind the weary gaze of a man the world ignored. He carried no sign of wealth, only a quiet determination to continue the experiment he had begun. The morning unfolded slowly. Vendors called out to customers, offering fresh fruit, fabric, and trinkets. Children carried small baskets of goods, and older workers pushed carts filled with supplies. People passed Ethan without a glance, treating him as though he was invisible. He was no longer the respected CEO. He was simply another forgotten man. It was Isabella Lee's appearance that broke the monotony. She walked briskly toward the market, her braids swaying with each step. Dressed in the same simple uniform from her job at the coffee shop, she carried a heavy bag over her shoulder. Despite the burden, her posture remained upright, and her brown eyes still held the spark of someone unwilling to give up. When she noticed Ethan seated in the same corner, her face lit with recognition. "Good morning," she greeted warmly, her voice genuine. Ethan nodded, offering a faint smile in return. "I thought about you yesterday," Isabella continued, lowering herself to sit beside him. She opened her bag and revealed a small container of rice and vegetables she had saved from her own meal. "It isn't much, but I didn't want you to go hungry." Ethan hesitated before accepting. The thought that she deprived herself to help him struck him deeply. "You should eat," he said gently, but Isabella shook her head. "I'll manage," she insisted. "My mother needs me strong, and I cannot let her see me tired, but sharing is never a loss." Her words resonated within him. Isabella's resilience was remarkable. Despite her struggles, she carried herself with dignity, never allowing hardship to define her character. As they shared the meal, Ethan asked quietly, "Your mother, how is she today?" Isabella's smile softened. "She has good days and bad days. Lately, the medicine is harder to afford, but she never complains. She tells me that life is about patience and faith. I want to believe her." Ethan listened intently. Grace Lee, though absent, was becoming vivid in his mind. A woman weakened by illness, yet strong enough to give her daughter wisdom. Their small home, modest and filled with challenges, seemed brighter through Isabella's love. Their conversation was interrupted when Clara Kim appeared once again. Her high heels clicked against the pavement as she approached with a group of friends. Dressed elegantly in a silk blouse and expensive jewelry, Clara exuded superiority. She noticed Isabella sitting with Ethan and smirked. "You again? Do you enjoy playing saint with beggars?" she asked mockingly. Her friends laughed quietly behind her. Isabella's jaw tightened, but she remained composed. "Showing kindness is not weakness," she replied firmly. Clara rolled her eyes and scoffed, turning away without further argument. Ethan, observing silently, compared the two women once more. Clara had known him for years in his true world of luxury, yet she had never shown depth of character. Isabella, with far less, displayed compassion that money could not buy. The difference grew sharper with each encounter. After Clara left, Isabella exhaled slowly. "I wish people understood that dignity does not depend on wealth," she murmured. Ethan studied her face, admiring her strength. Later, Isabella prepared to leave for work. She stood, adjusting the strap of her bag, and looked down at him. "Stay safe," she said softly. "I'll check on you again tomorrow." With that, she disappeared into the crowd, her figure fading among the busy workers. Ethan remained seated, holding the container she had given him, his thoughts heavy. For years, he had believed loyalty and kindness could be measured by business deals, contracts, and appearances. Yet here was a woman with no knowledge of his identity, offering more than any associate or partner ever had: sincerity. As the day turned into evening, Ethan returned to his mansion in secret. Mr. Han awaited him, concern etched into his older features. "You are taking risks, sir," he said as Ethan removed his disguise. "If word spreads that the head of Park Corporation is wandering the streets dressed as a beggar, it will cause chaos." Ethan met his advisor's gaze firmly. "Let them never know. This is not about the company, this is about truth." Mr. Han sighed, realizing that Ethan's conviction was unshakable. "Just remember, the more you connect with this young woman, the more painful the revelation will be when she learns who you are." Ethan leaned back, staring out at the skyline of the city he ruled by name, but no longer by heart. "She deserves honesty, but for now she deserves protection. I will not allow her kindness to be exploited." That night, as Isabella cared for her mother in their modest apartment, Ethan thought of her words and actions. A bond was forming, fragile yet undeniable, built not on power or wealth, but on humanity. He knew the disguise would not last forever, yet he also knew one truth. Isabella had already changed the course of his journey. The following morning brought with it a chill that swept across the streets, reminding everyone that the seasons were beginning to change. Ethan Park, once again dressed in his disguise of torn clothes and worn shoes, positioned himself in the familiar corner of the market. Though his body shivered, he found warmth in anticipation of seeing Isabella again. As the city awakened, he observed people rushing to their destinations, office workers with briefcases, delivery men carrying boxes, children hurrying to school. All moved past him without acknowledgement. He had grown accustomed to invisibility, but he also recognized how many lived that way each day. It was a reality he had never considered from the comfort of his luxurious penthouse. Isabella arrived shortly after, her expression bright despite the early hour. She wore her simple uniform, her braid neatly tied, and her worn shoes barely protecting her from the cold pavement. In her hands, she carried a thermos of tea and a small paper bag. "You must be freezing," she said gently, kneeling beside him. She opened the thermos and poured warm tea into the plastic lid, handing it to him. "Here, this should help." Ethan accepted, the steam rising into the cold air. He sipped slowly, grateful not only for the warmth, but for the thought behind the gesture. "You are very kind," he said in a low voice. Isabella shook her head. "Kindness should not be rare. The world would be different if more people cared." As they shared the simple meal she brought, a commotion stirred in the market. A young boy, no older than 10, darted between the stalls, clutching a loaf of bread. Behind him, an angry vendor shouted, chasing him through the crowd. The boy's clothes were torn and his face was thin with hunger. The vendor caught him by the arm, shaking him roughly. "Thief!" he shouted. "You will pay for this!" Isabella immediately stood. "Please wait!" she called, stepping forward. She reached into her bag and produced a few coins. "I'll pay for the bread. Let the boy go." The vendor hesitated, glaring at the child. After a tense moment, he snatched the coins from Isabella's hand and released the boy, who bolted away into the alley, clutching the loaf tightly. The vendor muttered angrily, but returned to his stall. Ethan had witnessed many business negotiations, disputes, and settlements, but none carried the quiet power of what Isabella had just done. She gave not out of wealth, but out of compassion, a sacrifice from someone who had little to spare. When Isabella returned, Ethan asked, "Why help him? He was stealing." She met his gaze with steady conviction. "Sometimes people steal because they have no choice. Hunger does not wait. If I can ease it, even for a moment I will." Her answer stirred something deep within him. He thought of his own company, Park Corporation, where food waste from their luxury restaurants was discarded daily. Never had he questioned where it might go or who it might feed. Isabella's perspective opened his eyes to injustices hidden in plain sight. Later that day, as Isabella prepared to leave for work, she hesitated. Looking at Ethan's thin disguise, she frowned. "Winter is coming. You cannot face the cold like this. Tomorrow I will bring you a coat. It's an old one, but it should help." Ethan wanted to refuse, unwilling to take more from her, but he saw the determination in her eyes. He nodded quietly. "Thank you." After she left, Ethan remained in the market, reflecting on the events of the day. For years he had trusted contracts, numbers, and appearances. Yet true trust, he realized, was born in moments like these, sincere acts that expected nothing in return. When evening fell, Ethan returned to his mansion, where Mr. Hahn awaited him with concern. "Sir, your absence is becoming longer each day," the older man said. "The board members are beginning to ask questions." Ethan removed his disguise slowly. "Let them ask. My time in those streets is teaching me more than a dozen meetings ever could." Mr. Hahn sighed, his tone heavy with worry. And this young woman, Isabella, she is at the center of it, isn't she? Ethan did not answer immediately. He walked to the large window of his office, looking out at the glittering skyline. She does not know who I am. She sees only a man in need, and still she offers her strength. Tell me, Han, how many in our world would do the same? The advisor remained silent, for he knew the truth. Few, if any, would show such purity of character. That night, Ethan could not rest. He thought of Isabella's mother, Grace Lee, battling illness in a modest apartment. He thought of Isabella herself, dividing her small earnings between survival and generosity. And he thought of the boy who ran away with bread, his hunger stronger than fear. In that quiet darkness, Ethan made a decision. His disguise was no longer just about discovering false friends. It had become a path toward understanding. If he was to learn the truth about loyalty, love, and human dignity, Isabella was the key. The following day would bring new trials, but Ethan was ready. He no longer saw himself as the CEO pretending to be poor. He was a man searching for answers, and for the first time in years, he felt alive. The morning air carried a sharper bite than before. Ethan Park, once more in his disguise, sat on the cold pavement at the edge of the bustling market. His shoulders were hunched, and his hands were buried deep in the pockets of his worn trousers. Though he had endured many boardroom battles and high-stakes negotiations, few things had tested his endurance like the bitter chill of these mornings. As the sun climbed, the familiar figure of Isabella Lee appeared, moving quickly through the crowd. She wore her usual cafe uniform, her braid swinging against her back, and carried a plastic bag. Her eyes immediately sought Ethan, and when she spotted him, her face softened with relief. "I told you I would bring it," she said with quiet determination. Kneeling beside him, she pulled from the bag a thick, old coat. It was clearly second-hand, its seams a little frayed, but it was clean and sturdy. She held it out to him. "Try it on." Ethan hesitated. He did not want to take something that she herself might need, but the resolve in her expression left little room for argument. Slowly, he slipped the coat over his shoulders. The warmth wrapped around him like a shield, and he could not deny the comfort it brought. "It suits you," Isabella said with a small smile. "Now at least you won't freeze out here." Ethan met her gaze, his voice low. "Why do you help me so much? You already work hard, you have your mother to care for, and yet you still find time for me." Her smile softened. "Because I believe no one should feel invisible. Life has taught me that even the smallest kindness can make a difference. If I have the ability to help, I will." Her words lingered with him. For years, Ethan had measured value through profits and success. Yet Isabella measured value through compassion, something money could never purchase. As they sat together, Isabella spoke about her life. "My mother's health is fragile, but she is strong in spirit. She worked for years as a teacher, always giving her students everything she could. When she fell ill, I promised myself I would take care of her. That's why I work extra shifts. It isn't easy, but she is worth every sacrifice." Ethan listened intently. Isabella's resilience humbled him. She carried burdens that would crush others, yet she bore them with grace and without bitterness. Later that morning, as Isabella prepared to leave for her job, two young men from the neighborhood approached. They were dressed casually with mocking smiles on their faces. One of them pointed at Ethan. "Why do you waste your time with him, Isabella? He's just a beggar. You could do better than sitting with someone like that." Isabella's expression hardened. She stood firmly between Ethan and the men. "He is not a waste of time. He is a person, and he deserves respect like anyone else. If you cannot understand that, then perhaps it is you who should reconsider your choices." The men laughed, shaking their heads, and walked away, muttering under their breath. Ethan watched silently, struck by the courage in Isabella's defense. She had no reason to stand up for him, yet she did so without hesitation. When she turned back to him, she offered a reassuring smile. Some people only see appearances. They don't know what's in a person's heart. Don't let their words trouble you. Ethan nodded, but inside, he was deeply moved. In his world of wealth and power, he had seen people flatter those with status while ignoring those without. Isabella, however, saw beyond titles and possessions. She treated everyone with the same dignity, and that made her unlike anyone he had ever known. That evening, after Isabella left for her shift, Ethan remained seated in the market, reflecting on the events of the day. Hours later, as the stalls closed and the streets grew quiet, a figure appeared. Mr. Hahn, his loyal advisor. He carried a briefcase and wore his usual formal attire, though his face showed signs of concern. "Sir," Hahn said in a low voice, glancing around to ensure no one overheard, "the board is growing impatient. They are asking why you disappear for hours each day. Some suspect you are planning changes without informing them." Ethan's expression was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "Let them wonder. What I am learning here will change the way we lead. I see now that our company, with all its wealth, has ignored realities faced by ordinary people. That must change." Hahn sighed. "And this young woman, Isabella, she influences you deeply. I can see it. But I must remind you, she does not know who you truly are." Ethan turned toward the quiet street, his voice steady. "That is what makes her actions meaningful. She shows kindness without expectation. If she knew I was a CEO, everything would be different. For now, I want to see who she is when the mask of wealth is removed." Hahn looked at him with a mix of respect and worry. "Just be cautious, sir. The truth has a way of revealing itself, and when it does, it may not be gentle." When Ethan returned to his mansion later that night, he hung the coat Isabella had given him on the back of a chair. It was not expensive, nor was it fashionable, but to him it carried more value than the tailored suits in his wardrobe. It was a symbol of sincerity, something no amount of money could buy. As he lay in bed, Ethan thought about the look in Isabella's eyes when she defended him, about the warmth of the coat on his shoulders, and about the life she carried with such quiet strength. For the first time in many years, he felt not like a CEO chasing power, but like a man rediscovering humanity. And as sleep claimed him, one thought remained. This disguise was no longer just about testing loyalty. It was leading him toward something far greater, something he could not yet name. The following morning, the streets were alive with movement as shopkeepers opened their doors, and the scent of fresh bread drifted from the bakery. Ethan Park, still cloaked in his beggar's disguise, sat quietly in his usual corner. Though his appearance suggested hardship, his sharp eyes studied everything with the discipline of a man who had spent years evaluating markets and people. It was Isabella Lee's day off from the cafe, but Ethan had already grown accustomed to her presence and wondered if she might still come by. He found himself waiting, his thoughts occupied by her strength and sincerity. Hours later, his patience was rewarded when he saw her walking briskly toward him, her long braid swaying behind her. "Good morning," she greeted warmly, carrying a small paper bag. "I thought you might be hungry, so I brought something." She handed him 2 sandwiches wrapped in brown paper. Ethan accepted them with genuine gratitude. "You always think of others before yourself," he said softly. Isabella smiled, though there was a trace of weariness in her eyes. "It's how I was raised. My mother always told me that kindness is never wasted, even if it isn't returned. She believed it makes the world less heavy." They sat together on the edge of the pavement, sharing the sandwiches. Ethan, despite his wealth and experience, found comfort in the simplicity of the moment. No luxury banquet or executive dinner had ever carried the same sense of peace. As they ate, Isabella grew thoughtful. "You know," she said quietly, "sometimes I wonder what life would be like if my father hadn't left us. He disappeared when I was very young, leaving my mother to raise me alone. She never spoke much about him, only that he chose ambition over family. I think that's why I value loyalty so deeply. Ethan felt a pang of guilt, as though her words were directed at him. He had not abandoned a family, but he knew well the cost of ambition. His rise to the top had demanded sacrifices, and for years he had justified them. Yet sitting beside Isabella, he questioned whether success had been worth the isolation it created. Before Ethan could respond, a loud commotion erupted at the far end of the street. A man, older and disheveled, staggered toward them. His clothes were torn, and his face carried the marks of exhaustion and anger. People moved aside as he shouted incoherently, demanding money from strangers. Some crossed the street to avoid him, while others watched in discomfort. The man stumbled closer, his unsteady gaze fixing on Isabella. "Spare some change," he demanded harshly, his voice rough from years of neglect. Ethan immediately stood, placing himself protectively between Isabella and the man. "Leave her alone," he said firmly. The stranger sneered. "And who are you to speak? You're just another beggar." Ethan's disguise left him powerless to assert his true authority, but Isabella stepped forward, her voice calm but steady. "Sir, I don't have money to give, but there's a shelter nearby that can help you. They offer meals and a place to sleep." The man muttered angrily, cursing under his breath, but eventually staggered away. Isabella let out a quiet breath of relief. Ethan turned to her, his concern evident. "You shouldn't have spoken to him. He could have been dangerous." She shook her head. "He's lost, that's all. Anger is often just pain that has nowhere to go. I can't ignore that, even if it scares me." Ethan studied her with admiration. Isabella's courage was not loud or reckless. It was rooted in compassion. She had the ability to see humanity where others saw only trouble. For Ethan, it was both inspiring and humbling. Later that day, as Isabella prepared to return home, she asked, "Do you ever think about the life you once had? About what brought you here?" The question caught Ethan off guard. He hesitated before replying. "Yes," he admitted. "I think about it often. I made choices that brought me here, but I also wonder if they made me lose something along the way." Isabella nodded thoughtfully, unaware of how close his words were to the truth. She gently touched the sleeve of the coat she had given him. "Whatever mistakes you made, they don't define who you are now. What matters is what you choose to do next." Her words stayed with him long after she left. That evening, as darkness settled over the city, Ethan returned briefly to his mansion. In the quiet of his study, he reviewed reports his advisor, Mr. Han, had left on his desk. They detailed growing unrest among the board members who questioned his unusual behavior and absence from key meetings. Ethan closed the files, his mind elsewhere. The truth was becoming clear. His disguise was no longer a simple experiment. It was reshaping his understanding of leadership, wealth, and human worth. Isabella's influence was undeniable. She had given him more insight than any consultant or strategist could. Yet with that realization came unease. Secrets had weight, and he knew he could not hide his identity forever. If Isabella discovered who he truly was, would she see betrayal instead of sincerity? Would she believe that his time among the streets had been genuine or dismiss it as a cruel test of her character? As he stood by the window, gazing at the city lights, Ethan understood that the path ahead would demand choices far more difficult than any he had faced in the corporate world. And while he was prepared to fight hostile board members or rival companies, he feared most the possibility of losing the trust of the one person who had shown him kindness without condition. The streets were quieter than usual that morning, the early mist softening the sounds of the bustling city. Ethan Park, dressed in his tattered disguise, found his usual corner in the marketplace. The chill of autumn had deepened, and his coat, Isabella's gift, offered little comfort against the biting wind. Yet the cold reminded him of the realities faced by those without wealth, a perspective he had never truly grasped until now. Ethan watched as street vendors set up their stalls, arranging fruit, vegetables, and simple handmade goods. Children ran past with school books in hand, laughing despite the chill. Life continued relentlessly around him, indifferent to his presence, yet he observed with the scrutiny of a man accustomed to strategy. Isabella appeared, her steps brisk, carrying a modest satchel. Her braid was slightly frayed from the morning wind, and her brown eyes held determination even as her body showed signs of fatigue from caring for her mother. She greeted him warmly. "Good morning, Ethan," she said, sitting beside him. "Good morning," he replied, smiling faintly. The warmth of her greeting contrasted sharply with the harsh world surrounding them. She offered him a small package of rice and vegetables, which he accepted gratefully. "You should eat," she said gently. "You look tired." "I am fine," he answered. "But thank you. Your concern is appreciated." Isabella smiled softly. "We all need support sometimes. It doesn't matter if someone is rich or poor. Care matters equally." As they shared the small meal, Ethan observed Isabella closely. Her hands bore calluses from constant work, yet she handled each movement with care and precision. Her voice carried patience and strength, yet beneath it lay the weight of responsibility for her mother, Grace Lee, who depended entirely on her. For Ethan, every detail of her character revealed resilience born of necessity rather than privilege. Their conversation shifted naturally to the events of the past week. Isabella recounted moments from her cafe job, small triumphs, and minor injustices she had witnessed among customers. She spoke of the elderly regular who always requested a discount on coffee because of his fixed pension, and of the single mother who could only afford a sandwich once a week. Each story carried empathy, yet none of them were told with pity. Ethan found himself drawn to her perspective, realizing how narrow his own view of society had been. In the corporate world, success often overshadowed humanity, and decisions were made based on numbers rather than lives. Isabella had opened a window into a world where the struggles of ordinary people mattered. Suddenly, a group of teenagers passed by, throwing scraps of paper at the pavement. One of them, a boy no older than 14, tripped over Ethan's foot. "Watch where you're going," the boy shouted, frustration in his voice. Ethan remained calm, but Isabella stepped forward. "Be careful," she said gently, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Accidents happen. Just pay attention next time." The boy's expression softened, and he mumbled an apology before hurrying away. Ethan's gaze followed the youth, noting the small lessons Isabella imparted without anger or condescension. She influenced people with subtlety and integrity, qualities that money and status could never replicate. As the morning waned, Isabella grew thoughtful. "Sometimes I wonder if all the effort is worth it," she admitted softly. "Caring for my mother, working long hours, helping strangers, it can feel endless." Ethan looked at her with admiration. "It is worth it," he said quietly. "What you do makes a real difference, more than you realize." She smiled, though weariness remained in her eyes. "I hope you're right," she said, glancing at him. "You seem different from others. I feel like you understand these struggles, even if you live in a very different world." Ethan's heart tightened. Here was a woman who had never known his wealth or power, yet she intuitively recognized integrity when she saw it. He realized that his disguise was no longer just a test of others. It was revealing truths about himself. Later that day, Ethan returned secretly to his mansion, removing his disguise and washing away the traces of the streets. Mr. Hahn, waiting in the study, observed him with quiet concern. "Your attachment to her is growing," he said. "You must remember, revealing your identity too soon could jeopardize everything." Ethan nodded slowly, his mind still with Isabella. "I know," he admitted. "But seeing her courage, her integrity, I cannot ignore it." She is more than a lesson in kindness. She is a reflection of what is truly important. Mr. Hahn remained silent, understanding that Ethan had reached a point where the lessons of the streets were shaping not just his actions, but his priorities and desires. As night fell, Ethan stood by the window of his penthouse, looking down at the streets where he had spent the day. Somewhere below, Isabella returned home, tending to her mother and preparing for another day of challenges. He knew that the path ahead would require patience, honesty, and protection. And as he watched the city lights shimmer against the darkness, Ethan understood that the bond forming between them was fragile, built on trust, courage, and selfless compassion. One wrong move could shatter it, but he was determined to navigate the complexities ahead, aware that this connection, rare and genuine, was something worth preserving above all else. The morning began with a damp chill, remnants of overnight rain leaving puddles along the streets of the city. Ethan Park, in his usual disguise, adjusted the coat Isabella had given him and moved carefully through the slippery pavement. Despite his careful steps, his mind was occupied with thoughts of her, Isabella Lee, whose compassion and courage had become the center of his attention. As he reached the familiar corner of the marketplace, he noticed her already there, sweeping the entrance of a small shop before the vendor arrived. Her movements were precise, yet gentle, revealing her careful nature and dedication. Even in mundane tasks, she carried a quiet dignity. "Good morning, Ethan," she greeted warmly, looking up from her work. Her uniform was damp from the mist, but she ignored the discomfort. "I brought some tea and a small breakfast for you." Ethan accepted the tea gratefully, savoring the warmth. "Thank you, Isabella. You are relentless in your kindness." She smiled faintly. "If everyone took care of each other, life would be easier. I just do what I can." They ate together in silence for a few moments, listening to the sounds of the awakening city. Street vendors arranged their goods, children laughed on their way to school, and passers-by hurried to their destinations. Yet amidst the bustle, the connection between Ethan and Isabella remained undisturbed, a fragile sanctuary of trust and understanding. Suddenly, a commotion drew their attention. A man in a sharp business suit was arguing with a vendor, his voice loud and demanding. "This is unacceptable. I will not pay for defective goods," he shouted, throwing the items onto the pavement. The vendor tried to explain, his words drowned by the businessman's anger. Seeing the tension, Isabella stepped forward. "Sir," she said firmly but politely, "please calm down. Mistakes happen, but we can find a solution without conflict." The businessman scoffed, turning his gaze toward her. "And who are you? A girl in a uniform? Do you think your words matter?" Ethan observed quietly. Unlike other women in her position, Isabella did not falter. She stood with poise, her voice calm yet resolute. "Yes, my words matter. Disrespecting others does not resolve your problem. Perhaps patience and understanding will." Her composure caused the man to hesitate. After a tense moment, he muttered angrily and stormed off, leaving the vendor visibly relieved. Ethan was impressed. Isabella's courage and empathy extended beyond her personal struggle. She influenced others with integrity and calm authority. Later, as the morning passed, Ethan and Isabella shared quiet conversation. She spoke of her mother's health, the challenges she faced caring for Grace Lee, and the small victories that gave her hope. Each story revealed a depth of character and resilience that went far beyond appearances. "You have endured much," Ethan said softly, "yet you face each day with strength. How do you maintain hope?" Isabella paused, considering the question. "Because giving up does not solve anything. My mother relies on me, and there are people around who need small acts of kindness. If I give up, the world becomes colder for everyone." Ethan felt a growing admiration for her unwavering resolve. Her perspective contrasted sharply with the world he had known, one driven by profit, status, and calculated advantage. Isabella's values were simple yet profound: compassion, courage, and integrity. As they finished their meal, a small dog appeared, shivering and soaked from the rain. It whimpered softly, clearly frightened. Isabella knelt, offering her hand. "It's okay, little one. You don't need to be afraid." Ethan watched as she gently picked up the dog, wrapping it in her scarf. "I can't leave it here," she said. "I'll take it to the animal shelter near my mother's house." The act was simple, yet it struck Ethan deeply. Her empathy extended not only to humans, but to those without a voice, without protection. He realized that these qualities were rare, and that the more he observed, the more he understood the depth of her character. When Isabella left to care for the dog and continue her day, Ethan remained on the wet pavement, reflecting on the events. He understood that her influence was reshaping him, not just his views of society, but his priorities and emotional compass. That evening, as he returned to his mansion and removed his disguise, Mr. Hahn waited in the study. "Sir," he said cautiously, "your time among the people is teaching you lessons no classroom could." "But Isabella, her presence affects you deeply. You must consider the consequences of your attachment." Ethan looked out the window at the streets below, his thoughts with her. "I know," he admitted. "But she embodies qualities that the world often ignores. Observing her, learning from her, it is not merely curiosity, it is revelation." Mr. Hahn nodded, understanding the depth of Ethan's reflections. The CEO's path was no longer only about testing loyalty. It had become a journey to understand human dignity, compassion, and the rare power of genuine kindness. As the night deepened, Ethan knew the days ahead would bring new challenges and revelations. The bond forming with Isabella, founded on trust and empathy, was growing stronger, and he recognized that its fragility demanded patience, discretion, and unwavering commitment. The city streets were unusually quiet that morning, the early light revealing a thin layer of mist that clung to the sidewalks. Ethan Park, in his familiar disguise, adjusted the coat Isabella had given him and walked carefully along the crowded streets. His eyes scanned the environment, observing both the routine of the marketplace and the subtle interactions of those around him. He had learned that every gesture, every reaction revealed character, and he continued to watch closely. Isabella appeared at the usual hour, her steps brisk as she approached him. Despite her own fatigue from long hours at the cafe and caring for her mother, she carried herself with a balance of resilience and warmth that never failed to impress him. "Good morning, Ethan," she said, her voice calm but filled with life. She held a small paper bag in her hand. Ethan smiled faintly, accepting the breakfast she offered. "Good morning, Isabella. You continue to amaze me with your generosity." She shrugged lightly. "It's not generosity, it's responsibility. I do what I can for those around me, whether they are family, friends, or strangers. Everyone deserves respect and help when possible." As they ate, a sudden noise drew their attention. A small crowd had formed near the edge of the marketplace. A young man in a suit argued with a street vendor, raising his voice over a minor misunderstanding about the price of goods. The vendor looked frustrated and helpless, unable to calm the situation alone. Isabella approached, her presence commanding yet unassuming. "Please," she said firmly, "there's no need for anger. A misunderstanding does not require shouting. Let us resolve it calmly." The man sneered, looking down at her. "And who are you to speak? You are just a shop assistant." Isabella met his gaze without fear. "I am someone who believes that respect and patience matter. Losing temper does not solve anything. Consider a better way to resolve your dispute." Her words were clear, measured, and confident. Slowly, the man's demeanor softened. After a tense moment, he muttered an apology and walked away, leaving the vendor visibly relieved. Ethan observed quietly, struck by Isabella's courage and wisdom. She had the ability to influence others with integrity, a quality that could not be taught or purchased. After the incident, They returned to their quiet spot, sharing a few simple words about their day. Isabella spoke about her mother, Grace Lee, and the small challenges they faced together: medical appointments, household chores, and the constant effort to maintain stability. Each story revealed Isabella's depth of character, her strength tempered with compassion. "You face many difficulties," Ethan said, "and yet you continue to act with integrity and care. How do you maintain hope?" Isabella paused, considering the question. "I have learned that giving up does not solve problems. Each small act of kindness contributes to something larger. It is not about recognition, but about making the world slightly better." Ethan nodded, realizing that her perspective challenged his understanding of success. Wealth, power, and influence had long defined his world, yet Isabella measured worth through empathy, resilience, and selfless action. Later in the morning, a small child appeared near their spot, crying softly. The boy had lost a toy and seemed frightened and confused. Isabella knelt beside him, speaking gently. "It's okay. We'll find it together." She searched patiently until the toy was located, handing it back with a reassuring smile. Ethan watched, deeply moved. Every action Isabella took, whether caring for a person, an animal, or even the smallest gesture of guidance, revealed her unwavering loyalty to her values. Her courage was not in bold statements or dramatic acts. It was in the consistent practice of kindness and responsibility. As the day progressed, Ethan began to reflect on his own life, recognizing the lessons Isabella offered him daily. His disguise, once a simple test of loyalty from others, had become a profound journey into understanding human dignity and integrity. Her influence reshaped not only how he viewed the world, but how he wished to live within it. When Isabella departed for her afternoon responsibilities, Ethan remained quietly on the street, contemplating the day's events. Later that evening, he returned to his mansion, removed his disguise, and sat by the large window overlooking the city lights. Mr. Han, his advisor, approached with a serious expression. "Sir," Han said cautiously, "your attachment to her is clear, but you must consider the implications if she discovers your identity too soon. The trust you have built is delicate." Ethan looked out at the streets below, his thoughts with Isabella. "I know," he said softly, "but trust and loyalty are not gained through titles or wealth. She demonstrates these qualities naturally. I must honor that." Mr. Han nodded, understanding the depth of Ethan's reflections. The CEO's journey was no longer about testing others' loyalty. It was about discovering the values that truly mattered and the rare influence of genuine character. That night, as Ethan prepared for sleep, he resolved to continue observing and learning, aware that the bond forming with Isabella was both fragile and invaluable. Each day brought new lessons, each moment a test of courage, empathy, and the quiet power of trust. The morning was calm, sunlight filtering softly through the city's high-rise buildings. Ethan Park, still in his beggar disguise, walked along the familiar streets, carrying a quiet sense of anticipation. Today, he knew, might be the day everything changed. Over the past weeks, every moment with Isabella Lee had revealed the depth of her character, her unwavering courage, compassion for the vulnerable, and strength rooted in empathy. She had unknowingly become the guiding light in his exploration of humanity. Isabella appeared, carrying her usual satchel and moving briskly toward him. She greeted him with her signature warmth. "Good morning, Ethan," she said, her brown eyes bright with energy despite her long hours of work and caring for her mother. "Good morning," he replied, adjusting the worn coat she had gifted him. The coat had become more than clothing. It symbolized the sincerity of her kindness, a tangible reminder of her selfless nature. Today, however, a new challenge awaited them. A wealthy and influential businessman, Mr. Collins, had arrived in the marketplace to inspect a series of investments, questioning the vendors aggressively and demanding to see proof of quality for every product. His tone was condescending, and his presence created tension among the local merchants. Isabella, noticing the stress he was causing, stepped forward calmly. "Mr. Collins," she said firmly, "we are committed to ensuring your concerns are addressed. Please allow us to demonstrate the quality of our goods and resolve this amicably." Ethan observed her, noting the same qualities that had drawn him to her from the beginning: patience, assertiveness, and integrity. She did not raise her voice or succumb to fear. She faced authority with grace and fairness. Mr. Collins, skeptical at first, watched her carefully. Slowly, his posture softened, and he nodded. "Very well," he said reluctantly. "Show me what you have." As Isabella efficiently guided him through the vendor's products, Ethan felt a growing admiration for her intelligence and composure. She remained consistent in her principles, treating everyone, rich or poor, powerful or ordinary, with respect. It was a reflection of character rarely seen in the corporate world he had once dominated. After the encounter, they retreated to their usual spot. Isabella handed Ethan a small cup of tea. "I hope that was not too stressful," she said gently. "Not at all," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "I am impressed by your ability to handle difficult situations with such calmness and clarity. You inspire trust effortlessly." Isabella blushed slightly, but her eyes reflected humility. "It's not about inspiring trust," she said. "It's about doing what is right, even when it is hard." As the afternoon passed, Ethan felt a shift within himself. He had come to the streets to observe loyalty and human nature, but over time Isabella had become more than a subject of study. She had become someone whose presence altered his understanding of life, empathy, and connection. When the sun began to set, casting a warm glow across the marketplace, Ethan knew he could no longer maintain his disguise. The lessons of the past weeks had been invaluable, but the truth now demanded to be revealed. He turned to Isabella, his heart pounding. "Isabella," he began, his voice calm yet resolute, "there is something you must know. I am not what I appear to be. I am Ethan Park, CEO of Park Industries. Everything you have seen, everything I have done here, has been under this disguise." Isabella's expression froze for a moment, shock evident in her wide eyes. "You... what?" she asked softly. Ethan continued, choosing his words carefully. "I came here to understand loyalty, kindness, and integrity. I wanted to see who people were when wealth and status were removed. I never expected to find someone like you, whose character is unshakable and genuine." Isabella took a moment to process the revelation. She looked at him, her brown eyes searching his face. "All this time, you were testing me?" she asked, her voice steady despite the confusion. "No," Ethan said firmly. "I was learning, and through it I discovered something more important than any corporate strategy or business plan. I discovered the value of sincerity, courage, and empathy. You have shown me a world I never truly understood." There was silence as Isabella considered his words. Slowly, her expression softened. "Then why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I wanted to know if your actions were genuine, not influenced by who I am," Ethan replied. "And now I see clearly that your kindness, your courage, and your strength are real. They have inspired me more than anything else in my life." For a long moment they sat in silence, the marketplace quieting around them. Then Isabella smiled, a mixture of relief and warmth. "I see," she said softly. "And I realize now, you have not only learned from me, but you have also trusted me with your secret. That is more than I could have expected." Ethan reached for her hand, the gesture simple yet meaningful. "I hope we can move forward with honesty and respect, building something based on trust rather than appearances." She nodded, her eyes reflecting understanding and cautious hope. "Yes, I think we can do that." As the evening light faded, the city seemed brighter than before. Two individuals, once separated by status and disguise, now stood on equal ground, bound by shared understanding, empathy, and a newfound connection. In that moment, Ethan realized that the greatest discoveries were not in wealth or power, but in the human heart, and in the courage to see and embrace truth.